A lot of Dynasty players build teams that are deep, but not dangerous. Some hoard depth, hang on to wide receiver sixes, and think having 17 playable guys is a strength. It can be in the right format, but more often than not, it's just being overly cautious to one's detriment. This video is all about understanding when depth matters and when it doesn't. We'll talk about tiering up, how to evaluate value using value metrics such as WAR or VORP, why league format matters more than a lot of people may think, and how you can structure your roster to actually win titles, not just survive the season. We can't answer the tier up question without knowing the league format. Start 9 versus Start 12 is a completely different universe. The replacement level player or points per game changes completely. If it's a 12-team Superflex Start 12, I know 24 quarterbacks need to be started across the league that week, and 120 total starters across the running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions need to be started. That means your wide receiver 50 to 60 types, guys like a Rashad Bateman, actually have some usefulness in a Start 12 league. Not high impacts, but they have usability. In a Start 9, though, Bateman's essentially worthless. There are only 84 starters across running back, wide receiver, and tight end. If you ever have to start Rashad Bateman in a Start 9, you're probably already in trouble. That's how I frame it. What's the wins above replacement, aka the WAR, or value over replacement, for each player based on the starting format? And for quarterbacks, the number of teams in the league matters more than the number of starters. A 14-team league is completely different than a 10-team league in terms of scarcity and replacement level. Assuming a 12-team league, though, the more starters there are, the less important the QB position is. Think about it this way. In a Start 9 league, the QB position consists of 2 of the 9 starters versus a Start 12 league where it accounts for 2 of the 12. So in a shallow league, the quarterback position just makes up a larger percentage of your starting lineup. The replacement level stays the same for quarterbacks, regardless if it is a Start 9 or Start 12, while it lowers and lowers for all the other positions as the number of starters increase. My default assumption when looking at teams is Start 10 or Start 11. That's the most common format in my leagues, and I think probably the most common in most people's leagues. And in those formats, I'm usually trying to consolidate more often than not. Let's start off with taking a look at one of the leagues I'm in for an example, before diving in a bit deeper. In this league, I've made 21 trades since the start of 2024. In 19 of those trades, I received either the same number of assets in return or fewer assets than I sent away. Why? Because in Dynasty Fantasy Football, 2 nickels are not worth a dime. I did so much tearing up that I ended up having an extremely thin roster. I was rolling out guys I picked up off of waivers before the season or early season, like Ray McLeod, Demarcus Robinson, Jordan Mason, Justice Hill, and putting them into my flex spots weekly. This is the part people often forget. When you do a 2-for-1 tier up trade, you're not just getting the better player, you're also gaining a valuable roster spot. That extra slot let me stash upside waiver guys like Jordan Mason, and it gave me the flexibility to pounce early on a plug-and-play option like a Ray McLeod. I had devastating injuries on this team, such as Chris Godwin's brutal foot injury when he was putting up wide receiver 2 overall numbers. Dak Prescott's season-ending hamstring injury. I lost J.J. McCarthy before the season even started. Jordan Mason himself was injured half the season. J.K. Dobbins went down. Hollywood Brown was out the whole year. And then Jalen Waddle and Breece Hall were just a disaster. And I was still fortunate enough to be able to lead that league in points for. Why? Because I utilized my team value very efficiently in this league. I maximized my WAR. I bought studs and was forced to play the matchups with waiver wire talents for my last flex spot or 2. And I used my excess of picks to fill injury holes with high points per game replacements. Luck will always play a role, and it did for my team here too, to an extent. It just doesn't always work out this perfectly, but this strategy is all about maximizing your edge. By being intentional with your roster construction and how you allocate value, you give yourself the best shot at turning that value into real wins. I waited until I knew what injuries or holes that I had. Then I used that extra draft capital I'd banked to plug those exact gaps and capture the most WAR as possible with those picks, rather than just preemptively trading for depth and risking letting all that depth go to waste. This is a concept Scott Connor of Destination Dynasty has talked about before. His study showed that a lot of Dynasty players fail to actually capture spike weeks and more efficiently. Not everyone should be looking to tier up right this second. You need the team value to do it. For anyone unfamiliar with the concept of team value, in essence, team value is basically the total worth of all your assets, players and picks, measured in market terms. I like to think of it as how many firsts is my team worth if I broke it down, and how does it compare to others? An easy way to look at this is Keep Trade Cut's league power ranking tool, which, say whatever you want about Keep Trade Cut's flaws, their league power ranking tool and team breakdowns by position is an awesome interactive tool. It's easily my personal favorite for evaluating team values. I'll include the link in the description if you're interested in plugging in your league or see how your team stacks up against some other teams in your league. I'll make a separate video later on about the art of building team value. But in short, it is largely about trading for and holding stable assets over time. The best way to build towards tiering up is to turn your roster into picks and efficient liquid assets, then strike. And this is a key point. Picks are, in my opinion, simply a better way to store depth than fringe players. Most of my teams are built this way. Overweight in future draft capital and underweight on value held in players that aren't in my projected starting lineup. The first reason for this is because players are not as liquid as picks are. Nearly every team values picks. So when it comes to make a trade, they're just easier to move. And they retain their value better. Fringe players often fade or become bench clutter, but picks tend to maintain or even gain value over time. That flexibility becomes a massive edge when you're trying to tier up. But even more importantly, it just gives you the ability to score points exactly when you need them. Because the truth is, you're not just holding picks to make tier up trades. You're holding them so that when your lineup as a whole, from an injury, bye, underperformance, whatever it is, you can trade a second or third for the exact player that you need in that moment. You're buying the war at the perfect time. That's a strategic edge I think some managers fail to capitalize on. The other reason is simple. Picks hold their value better. Studies show that every asset on average, except for draft picks and rookies, are more likely to lose value season to season than to gain it. This is especially true with veteran depth assets. Not only do picks hold their value better season to season, but they are also way less volatile during the season, like on a week-to-week basis. Let's take Jacoby Myers. He's worth about a mid-2026 second on Keep Trade Cut. And I think most people would agree he's worth about a second. What happens if he has a string of bad games? That value craters. If he gets hurt, he's nearly untradeable. His value ceiling, though, maybe an early second if things go really well. But a second round pick itself doesn't lose value like that. It's stable. And when it's time to tier up, you need that stability and reliability in an asset. If you want Myers in your lineup, that's one thing. But if you are a contender and he is your wide receiver 6 coming off your bench, you're probably just better off cashing in for the second now if you can. Taking it a step further, lots of dynasty benches are clogged with guys like Wan'Dale Robinson or Marvin Mims. Players who theoretically have upside or usability, but rarely ever crack your starting lineup. If they're your wide receiver 8 or 9, they're not really helping your team win. They're just sitting there and are more likely to lose value than to gain it. If the main thing you're hoping for is that they just gain value, or that someone else in your league likes them more than you do, then you're basically using that roster spot as a placeholder for future trade value. And if that's the case, picks are just better placeholders. They're more liquid, more stable, and open up a roster spot that you can use on a player that probably has about just as much usability as a Marvin Mims or Wan'Dale does. The reality is, when you go to tier up, the other manager probably doesn't want your wide receiver 9. They want a second or they want a third. So give yourself the best chance to close those deals and keep your bench from becoming dead weight in the process. Ultimately, though, the singular most important reason that tier up trades are so powerful is because fantasy football impact is not linear. The gap between the wide receiver 5 and the wide receiver 17 is not the same gap as between the wide receiver 17 and the wide receiver 29, even if there's just 12 spots difference between the two each way. Last year, there was a 3.5 points per game difference between wide receiver 5 Justin Jefferson and wide receiver 17 Devonta Smith. There's only a 1.3 points per game difference between wide receiver 17 Devonta Smith and wide receiver 29 DJ Moore. That might not seem that significant of a difference, but really it is. That's nearly three times the gap between wide receiver 17 and 5 as it is between 17 and 29. In the 2 years before last year, the gap was even greater than this example, actually. The impact the best players have in fantasy football is exponential. It's not linear. Stars win leagues. I think the market sometimes underrates that a little. And this doesn't even factor in the dynasty slash value retention aspect to all of this. A Justin Jefferson or a Malik Neighbors' odds of maintaining their status as an extremely valuable dynasty asset over the coming years are quite high. I rarely tear down, but when I do, it's usually one of two reasons. I'm rebuilding and splitting a bigger, stagnant asset into multiple potential ascending pieces, or two, I have most all the leverage in a trade and can get two for close to the price of one. One recent example is I traded a future second for two players I valued slightly below a future second. DeAndre Swift, who's part of the deal, himself is worth equal to a future second, according to the market and ADP. I got the clear, better end of this deal, according to market values, simply because the other manager needed to offload vets. It's almost not really a tear down trade, though. That's just taking advantage of the leverage you have in a deal. In conclusion, here are the main things to remember. One, know your format and replacement levels. Start 9 versus start 12 isn't a small difference. It completely changes how valuable depth is and what kind of players matter. The wide receiver 55 in start 9 leagues is close to worthless. Not so much the case in start 12. Two is don't chase value when you need impact. Holding a bunch of decent assets isn't the same as building a lineup that can win you a title. Consolidate value into players who move the needle, which leads into the last point, which is fantasy production is exponential, not linear. The difference between elite players and mid-tier options is bigger than it may look. Stars win leagues. Build your roster so that it gives you leverage, flexibility, and the power to go get difference makers. And when you're ready to make that move, tier up. Sometimes an overpay really isn't an overpay. If you like content like this, hit subscribe. And if you want me to review your roster or walk through your league, drop a comment or email at the address on the screen. Appreciate you all for watching.